All right. I am back again, I believe. All right. Okay, cool. We're back. So last time we made, well, I made us a fun little plant. I'll bring it up again just to show you guys. Yeah. Cool. So basically we talked about how because the realm of A7 has weird terrain and stuff, that the plants also had to be kind of weird, capturing light in these cups kind of situation, and then that you get parasitic plants which feast upon the light inside of these plants. And probably also, like, you know, the poop of these animals. Go away. Into these plants, which, you know, brings nutrients and all that fun stuff. So yes, what should I be doing today? So we've created these parasitic plants. What kind of world building should we be doing today? Okay, so I think figuring out a bit of the ecology might be useful. So basically, the reason why I am starting with A7, is because in A7 is where the law come about. So the law are basically the main sentient species of the Myriad Skies, at least in the beginning. Or at least the main civilization building type of species. Now, law come about from a currently I've called them walking nests. I've not quite figured out what they look like exactly, because figuring that out is actually kind of hard for me at the moment. Wait a minute. But basically, they are like these amalgamations of... These are trees, by the way. Don't judge me. They're basically these superorganisms. So what a superorganism is basically a organism that consists of multiple smaller macroscopic creatures, in a sense. So you know that you've got like single-celled organisms, then we humans consist of a stupid amount of these cells. So we're a multicellular organism. Now, a superorganism is basically an organism that consists of multiple multicellular organisms. So a walking nest is one of these. Now they start off life already quite large, like about already like the size of an elephant or so by comparison. So considerable size. Then, as they go along in life, they basically go around and meet other species. You know, generally smaller species, and because of something that I'll get into more later, probably at some point. But basically, these walking nests, which are currently just a single organism, have a way of basically connecting their minds to the other species. So that they kind of create a single greater mind, in a sense. And this mind then acts as a single individual. Now, because the walking nests, like the infant walking nest, already tends to have a kind of stronger mind, in a sense. It will still mostly decide what is going to go on, but it's not so much a case of subservience, but more of a collaboration with weighted strengths of collaboration. So, whereas initially the walking nest will have complete domination, in a sense, over these member species, basically, which become part of it, in a sense. As it accumulates more species and just basically becomes like this huge creature. This is just a representation, by the way, so showing that, like, you know, lots of species are forming a single giant creature. By this point, the sheer mass of minds that is in this creature means that the original mind doesn't have that much say anymore. So this is a completely different mind, in a sense. These combined minds form a single unique mind that is different from its original mind. So it is truly like a single giant organism, rather than just being a amalgamation of species controlled by this one. It's not subservience, it's a combined hive mind, in a sense. So these can become absolutely immensely big. Like, say these are trees. I haven't figured out quite how large these become. But I believe, if I remember correct, actually, I'll get to that later, but it'll become clear just how huge these creatures have to be based on what I've imagined for them. At least one of these. Because as a process of this situation where they basically get born and then just collect species, in a sense, that then form a greater whole. And they also manipulate those species, quote unquote, genetically. There we go. Unillegible writing, but basically, yeah, they also modify them genetically and basically do selective breeding amongst these member species and such, so that they become more specialized. So, for example, you might have a type of beetle that comes in, but then it might become selected to be so that the legs actually become more like little hooks, for example. And maybe their mouths go to the bottom, being covered by the shell. The shells become thicker and more armored, and then they basically you get many of these bugs that interlink, for example, and use their paws to hold tight, and basically they become a skin. So they can become like an armored scale skin of a creature like this. Now, this might not specifically be of the walking nest that I'll be talking about, but it is a possibility. So eventually, after a long period of time, probably like thousands of years or something, of selective breeding and selection, and possibly even a bit of direct manipulation, they basically form a lot of member species that are completely dependent on them and are very much perfectly usable, perfectly adapted for the greater whole. Where was I going with this? Right. So yeah, you've got the walking nest, basically. Now, why am I talking about the walking nest in relation to region A7? Well, and specifically in relation to the aforementioned law. Well, the law are a member species of one of these creatures, one of these walking nests. That's where they start off their life. There used to be some sort of other species. I haven't really decided yet what it is. It might be, you know, like primate-like or something. It might already have some of the basic building blocks for becoming a sentient creature. But it probably was not by the time that one of these gazed upon them. So it eventually, one of these walking nests would have come across them, saw some potential in them, specifically as kind of a generalist creature, because being able to do a lot of things is just generally useful, and being adaptable is useful as well. So what you get is you basically get this. So these law gets used to basically be a kind of contingency to a lot of situations. Most species get turned into very specific roles, like for example armor, or as part of organs in the digestive system, or you know, that kind of stuff. But law are great as a generalist creature because they would have already had some of the intelligence that they would have, some of the general intelligence. They already would have had something akin to hands that would allow them to manipulate things and such. And they would already have a bit of a social structure. So they would have been absorbed and then refined according to the walking nest's whims, basically, and would have been joined into it. Which also increased the intelligence of the walking nest, probably. Especially as it developed the sentience and such. The exact implications of that I have not quite figured out. Nope. But I'll work on that. Like, I imagine that, well, you'd probably have a part of the walking nest that is fairly instinctual, but then you also develop this kind of sentience in it, like this greater sentience. But I imagine that these two sides cause a very, very fascinating type of intelligence. And I kind of imagine that these walking nests, because they themselves are not social creatures, like they are very solitary creatures, because they are the biggest things around. Like if they were to be social, they would destroy ecosystems, and they can't really do that. So they are solitary creatures, but they can have the capacity of being really intelligent. So what I think that leads to is that they will they will try and make their environment as well as suitable for them as possible. And that is probably also what the walking nest of A7 has been doing. Over time, it would have turned the region of A7 into as perfect of an environment for itself as it could. I've gone on a tangent again from the lore, haven't I? Yes. Well, regardless, yeah, this was a thing that I did want to talk about. That's basically walking nests. They shape themselves and their member species, but they also shape the environment around them. And yeah, basically they cultivate the environment around them. So rather than doing what us humans do, for example, which is building structures and building machinery that does what we want them, walking nests have a kind of almost intuitive understanding of like genetics and breeding, I suppose, and that kind of stuff. Like a geneticist might not be able to have a conversation with them, and you know, they might not understand each other, but a walking nest will be able to shape the environment, the biological environment, in ways that it wants. And so, yeah, it will over its very, very long lifetime, it will cultivate the land around it, the plants and animals around it, to basically form an ecosystem that can ideally support it. And that is something that I need to figure out. So yeah. Cultivation. That is one thing that I need to figure out. Now, let's continue on about the lore first. So yes, you've got this. The walking nest has basically created a sentient species at some point. Now, this is it's going to be a little bit of a I suppose boring thing, but basically, lore are green-skinned humanoids with a relatively flat nose. Well, these ones at least. They will have relatively dark green skin. Their hair, I believe, ranges from dark green to like black and possibly dark blue. Now, the reason why they are this dark green is because of what we talked about last time, which is that the region of A7 has a lot of colors in its rain, but not green, like various wavelengths of green. I'm not yet sure if wavelengths are going to be a thing because this world does have different physics. But for now, I'm just going to use wavelengths because that is easier to, like, people might already understand that a little bit. Anyway, so yeah, they're green because it basically allows them to blend in with the environment. Because although the walking nest would have cultivated the land to be somewhat ideal, I imagine that lore aren't necessarily the newest, and it might just be a leftover from times past. And also, it's just, yeah, easier, I suppose, because like the animals will still want to live and such, so they'll, yeah, basically, camouflage will still have a point. It'll mean less pressure on the walking nest to cultivate creatures that ignore lore, and it just means that lore can go about doing their thing without being interrupted as much, I imagine. And just most things in this region tend to be dark green or some form of green that makes them look black under the lighting. Yeah, so basically blends them into the environment. Now, besides those things, there's some other things that make them a little bit unique. I'm just gonna make a very simple diagram of a person. It is not pretty, but that it doesn't need to be. So first up, their airways. So they do not have the traditional, like lungs of a human. Instead, they sort of have they have kind of a continuous stream going on almost. But if you zoom in on it, it's kind of a case of you've got like a little bladder, and then you've got the little bits that like where the blood vessels pass by. So this is where the material transfer happens, and then you've got another little bladder, and this is on heaps of these. So it's all throughout this stuff, and they're constantly pumping. They're constantly yeah, like this one might inflate, and this one might deflate, pushing air one way. And then there's probably also like little valves to make sure that things go one way, like little organic valves. Similar to how we have in some of our arteries. Or it's probably not the arteries, it might be the veins. One of the two. I think it's veins that have blood coming from the extremities back to the heart in humans. Probably same with Law, to be honest. Anyway, so yeah, they've got a kind of continuous airflow going on. So it means that they'll have a more continuous endurance, probably. Like they'll be able to be more continuously going, and they'll also be able to speak in a more continuous manner, like without having to take a breath, kind of. I think it also might mean that they have a more difficult time holding their breath. But I also think that it is it might be quite efficient, like that it gets a lot of the material out and a lot of the material in. But I am not a biologist, so I'm not sure if that would be how that works. Feedback on that part specifically is very much appreciated. Then on either sides of their chest, they have two chambered hearts. I believe one of the chambers pushes stuff towards the brain, which then comes back to the other heart, and then the other heart brings it all the way to the body, but I'm not sure about that. I can't quite remember if that is how that's supposed to work. And of course, it'll pass by the oxygen supply. So here's an interesting question that I don't actually have an answer for currently. So you've got the lungs. These are some ugly ass lungs. But yeah, basically the lungs are kind of like a basket, I suppose. But yeah, so you've got the lungs, and then you've got the hearts. So I wonder if the heart. Let's actually make it red so that we actually know that these are hearts. Cool. So I wonder if each of the hearts should have a dedicated part of the lungs. So like that, one of them runs like past. Wait, they probably would. So I'm just thinking live as we go. So let's say that the airflow goes this way. So clean air goes in that way, and not clean air goes that way. Should I make it muckier? Not clean air goes that way. So if that is the case, then wait a moment. Okay. So I think that then the blood supply would have to kind of go this way. I think. So basically, it first deposits bad stuff. Wait a minute, I have a pipette somewhere. So basically, the bad stuff goes out into there, which that means it can go out like that. And then the good stuff can go in. Yeah, after the bad stuff has been kicked out. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay. Now the question is that I wanted to ask is, should it just be one heart that deals with the lungs? Or should each heart have half the bundles that it pushes past? Kind of situation. And then one of the hearts brings the blood to the rest of the body, and the other heart brings it to the brain. Now, if it's just one heart that brings blood into the lungs, that means that there's going to be a lot of because I think in a human, how it works is basically you've got the heart, and it's got like 2 chambers, and one of the chambers goes to the lungs, and the other chamber, I don't know if those are the right chambers, by the way, or the right parts, because unfortunately I don't know. But anyway, the other one goes to the entire body, I think. I think that's how that goes in the human body. So we could mimic that here, where instead of having 2 of the chambers lead to one and 2 of the chambers lead to the other, we have separate hearts leading to one or the other. But I think that although it might be a little bit less efficient in some ways, I'm actually liking the idea of having both these hearts, which have 2 chambers each, pump past here. Because that would mean that basically the brain has its own independent oxygen supply. But even so, if one of them fails, you don't suddenly have like a complete failure of everything. It would mean that if one heart... Actually... Okay, I need to figure this out. So let's make a... Let's just say that this is the symbol for lungs. And then wait, no. So that is the left heart, and that is the right heart. Almost did it again. Cool. So that's the schematic of things. No, I might as well do lung. Okay. So basically, and then right now, let's. So square is the body and circle is the brain. Okay, so we've got the left heart and the right heart. Then we've got the lungs. And we've got the brain. And we've got the rest of the body. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Okay. So, let's say that the right heart supplies to the brain. So, if it first goes to the lungs, and then it goes to the brain, okay, then it goes to the left heart, then it goes to the lungs, and then it goes to the rest of the body, and it goes to the Yes, I think this works quite well, because then you still have a continuous supply. So even if one of them fails, so for example, say the left heart fails, you still have a weaker bloodstream that passes through the left heart, through force, and then goes past the lungs into the body and to the right heart. So it basically means that if your left heart, if your left heart kind of like fails, you're gonna be weak of body. You're probably gonna feel very tingly. Don't you just love the tangents we go on? I mean, I was trying to figure out some other stuff, but we're world building. This is fine. These tangents are important at some point. They might be a little bit confusing, but we're not here for an organized experience. We're here for the ride. All right. So anyway, so if your left heart dies, you'll have a relatively weak body, so you'll You'll have difficulty like lifting things. So you'll have low strength. You'll feel tingly. What other things happen when you're I suppose a high chance. Let's abbreviate that. A high chance of gangrene, I think. And yeah, like other nasty stuff. Now, if your right heart fails, then you're gonna have probably a stronger body in general. Like you'll be able to do a lot more things, but you'll probably have like issues with mind fog, slow, slow mind, a pretty high chance of. Hope that's change. Chance. So yeah, you'll be fainting. Yeah, you'll be dizzy. So what we've got here basically is we've got a medical way of diagnosing whether in law it's a right heart failure or a left heart failure. Because if the right heart fails, you're going to have issues with the brain. You're going to have a lot of your brain, your mind is going to be affected by it, and you're going to have a bad time in that aspect. And whereas if your left heart fails, your brain is going to be fine, but your body is going to feel weak, lethargic. It's going to be tingling, kind of like pins and needles. You're not going to be able to, like lift as much. Probably even like lifting your own body weight is going to be quite a bit of a struggle. And like, if any of your blood vessels get cut off a bit or like blocked a bit, like your limbs might just start dying on you. Not pleasant. Yeah. Cool. So yes, I think I'm happy with that. I mean, it's awful. So hopefully, this doesn't. I mean, this is going to happen because I'm trying to make a world here, not a fairy tale. And even fairy tales historically were kind of awful. Anyway, yeah. But interestingly enough, unlike with humans, although I don't know how. I suppose hearts can partially fail in humans, but yeah. So you can have like a partial heart failure. Like you can have one of your hearts fail. You're still gonna live, but it's gonna be a very painful existence until you can get that heart started again. Let's see. Yeah. And then okay. Right. One more thing. So one more issue is that they're gonna be beaten. Like getting them to synchronize is going to be difficult because I mean they are on different sides of the body. There's probably not to scale, by the way. None of this is probably exactly to scale, but cool. Another thing that I should note. So besides these organs, I believe that all of the organs are kind of the same as with a human, mostly. Like they'll probably have something like a stomach and a liver and stuff. This may change because I'm still very much figuring this kind of stuff out. But there is one more additional organ. And that is kind of a... now, I haven't quite finalized this yet because this is probably the most unusual thing. But basically, I think like around we're a little bit lower and a little bit more central, I think, than where with humans the heart is. So kind of like around the, I guess maybe the solar plexus or something. Is that where the solar plexus is? Like you've got like the diaphragm. Wait, they wouldn't actually have a diaphragm, would they? Because they don't need to breathe in that manner. It's kind of like all localized to here. Yeah. So there's no need to worry about that being pierced by anything. So that, I think that kind of allows kind of a shape to an organ to be here. So this is kind of, so what this is a magical organ. Now, I'm not going to get into the very specifics of magic yet, but magic is basically like the fundamental force of physics in this setting. But basically, what you need to know about it is that you've got particles, magical particles, which normally don't really interact with real stuff too much. But if they get pushed together hard enough, they form links. If those links get strong enough and big enough, eventually it pushes into a third direction, or a fourth direction actually, because it is still three-dimensional. But then it pushes into a fourth direction and becomes real. And this basically defines this creates real things. Don't worry too much about the details, but that is basically how magic works. So what a magical organ is basically a muscly mass Wow, this is like that is an awful hand. But anyway, a muscly mass of yeah, a muscly mass which contains bits that are very magically interactive. So in this kind of like circular organ, oh my god, that looks like a face. You've got all these little bits and a very, very complex system of muscles, which I don't really know how to show that. But basically, it's a complex mass of muscles and these magic interacting bits, which basically allows it to force magic particles into certain states. So either it can, for one, store magic, so probably... Actually, rather than just being a single spherical thing, it's probably more of like a case of two like spheres or egg-shaped things, and I'm sure you can make jokes about this, but it's inside of your chest, so not anywhere lower. But yes, so you've basically got the two like spheres that are touching each other, one of which is basically like storage, and one is like a processor in not the computer sense, but basically, so maybe I should call it something else. Maybe I should call it a manipulator. Yeah, because that's legible. So one of them is storage, one of them is a manipulator. The storage one is probably relatively easy. It's probably just... I'm doing the thing where I say a lot. It's probably just layers upon layers upon layers. Possibly even like a spiral or something. Which then kind of like stores the magical energy, but keeps it separate from each other so that it doesn't bind into a structure. So... pressing the wrong button there. So you basically have like, yeah, so that it cuts through, and so that these kind of links can't form. Right. Yeah. And so it kind of like stores it in that sense. And then when it needs it, the storage will basically just kind of like push out particles as needed into the manipulator, which is the aforementioned blob of specifically arranged muscles and magically reactant material, which then kind of like squeezes and folds and molds these particles into magical structures. So it'll actually purposefully push these particles together in very specific ways to produce magical structures and therefore create real effects. Now, this is not the full picture, because if you just have this happening, what happens is, say you want to say you want to liquefy something, because that's something that can be done. It's not melting, it's liquefaction. It's different, but anyway, if you want to liquefy something, if you then try and use the manipulator to liquefy something, you're going to liquefy your manipulator, because the structures get formed in here in the manipulator, which then immediately act upon the manipulator itself and liquefy it, which is a bad time. Like, that is... You're basically going to lose your magic, which is a very bad thing. Instead, what a person has, and most living things have this, actually. So the magical organ, instead of creating structures which do directly the thing that you want them to do, they actually, the manipulator actually produces a very complex set of structures which form a kind of link, a kind of almost nervous system of magic, like a magic circulatory system or something like that. And this kind of like fills the entire person. And the manipulator itself is, together with the brain, I suppose, it might even have some brain matter of its own attached. Yeah, that sounds fun. Let's say that it has kind of like a... Wait, brains are more associated with pink, so let's go for like a nice fleshy pink. Let's say it has kind of like a kind of donut. Let's erase the stuff inside of it. Kind of like a donut of brain matter around it, which is basically like the magic lobe. So that the brain doesn't even actually have to do all that much. It doesn't have to do much of the processing of the magic, and this way, like, the magic gets done real efficiently. Although I do imagine that because it is located here, that it's probably not going to be fed by the brain heart, but it's going to be fed by the body heart. So yeah. Anyway, you've got... Yeah, I don't know how to make brain wiggles. So I'm just going to make some wiggles. Yeah, so you've basically got like this donut of brain matter around the manipulator and the storage. Yeah. Yeah, that's... that might not be the most efficient thing. Alternatively, it could be that it's... We don't want it to encase the manipulator probably, in case something goes wrong with the magic. Well, we could make it kind of a sweater. So there's a few possibilities here. So one possibility is you've got the manipulator, and then you've basically got just like this bit that's exposed, and the rest is all surrounded by brain matter. And then it has one output for the magic self. I think that might potentially be problematic because it means that it can be easily cut off. Like the magic self could probably like the where is it? So this expanded self, this expanded network of magic, that is called the magic self. It's basically how an organism knows magically what itself is. So that when it tries to, for example, cast a fireball, not entirely sure if that's possible yet, probably, not currently. If it, say, casts a fireball, it doesn't blast its arm off, you know, like it doesn't create a fireball like here and then destroys the entire forearm or something. So it knows where its magical self is. Okay, so this would mean that the magical self is quite fragile. Alternatively, I could also have the brain matter be kind of like a separate thing attached there, but that seems like it could like fall off or something. So I think that this is the most fun and the most interesting, so that it basically like then basically the magic organ kind of has like this kind of shape, which I think is kind of fun. Yeah, that's an interesting shape. Let's just go with it. It might even be a case that it actually runs quite deep, so and then that it kind of goes like all the way to there, so that you still have relatively fast connections everywhere. Yes. Yeah, it'll run pretty deep. So on this model, it's basically like that's the throughput, because it doesn't need to be bigger, because the storage will generally not feed too much in, I suppose, and it's going to be compressed massively in the manipulator anyway. Yeah. Okay, returning from that tangent, as I was saying, you basically the magic organ creates this complex network of magic structures throughout your entire body, which is basically like these structures are signaling structures. They can be manipulated in a very specific way so that they produce so that they can create magic structures at the location where they want it to be. So yeah, these are very sophisticated magic structures, but any creature that can use magic usually has these, so it's quite an old development. It's not unique to lore. Definitely the magic self is not unique to lore, but the magic self might be in other organisms might be more primitive. Like trees, for example, will have one that they can't really use for magic or anything like that, but they can use for protection. So that you can't just, cast magic inside of a tree or just liquefy it at will, at a whim. Because a tree wouldn't like that. And having a magic self is a great protective measure to basically prevent magic from being cast inside of you. Because you basically can disrupt the magic that anything else is trying to cast. Now, in the lore, the magic self is, or the magic organ is sophisticated enough because of it actually having a brain, its own little attached brain, that it can produce structures which will interact with the magic self to produce magic exactly where you want it. This still requires some practice and training, especially to cast specific types of magic. But it can be learned in a relatively intuitive way, similar to like walking or cycling, or that kind of stuff. Yeah, I was going to draw a bike, but never mind. Yeah, so basically that means that the magic cells manipulator basically just has to shape the right code to send through the magic self, so that the signal goes to the right place and is the right kind of signal to create magic in the right place, so that you don't burn your hand off when you cast a fireball. Which is why the magic organ needs a brain, because that is some sophisticated stuff right there, and it just needs to intuit that. And in a lot of ways, it can. Another thing that it can do is basically package a little bit of raw magic, so just the magic particles basically, and send that along with the signal. Basically as fuel for the magic. And that will basically result in you casting magic even if there's no magic around. Yeah. So that is another organ that they have. Okay. So to recap on the organs of a lure, they have lungs which kind of go around. They are more continuous. They go from one side to the other, and have these little bladders that kind of like push it along constantly in one direction. And then, yeah. So you have a continuous flow of air, basically. So they don't so much have like in and out breaths as just a continuous breath. Then they have two hearts, a left and a right heart. These hearts, one of the hearts, I mean, it's pretty arbitrary which does which, I reckon. In some people, it might even be the opposite way around anyway, like how in some people in our world, the organs are flipped. But for now, let's say the right heart pumps blood to the lungs, oxidizes the blood, brings it to the brain, sends it to the other heart, where the junk gets chucked out into the lungs, which sounds terrible, but that's how lungs work. You know, the junk being like CO2. And such. Then, you know, fresh oxygen or whatever gets added to the mix, gets sent to the body, deoxygenizes, and goes back to the right heart, where it gets sent to the lungs and back to the brain. Cool beans. And then lastly, you've got the magic organ, which has a magic storage, and a magic manipulator. The storage is basically an onion of magic, which basically compresses to send magic material, like magic particles to the manipulator. And then the manipulator is this writhing mass of magic material and muscles, which sends special codes down the magic self, which permeates the entire body, and at the extremity, and then sending packages of raw magic to where it wants, together with the codes to basically indicate what kind of magic this should be, and then it creates the magic structures on the surface of the skin, and that causes the magic to happen, literally. Cool. Okay, so that is what makes Lore unique. On the outside, they're not all that unique in a lot of ways compared to humans. Basically, just having dark green skin. Although they do have a fun thing where they can basically absorb the multicolored water, and they can basically pump around the particles that make it give off light, so that they can produce patterns of various light across their body in kind of streaks. It's not completely body, like, you know, complete according to their body, but it's more like stripes. Kind of like how a cat has, how some cats have stripes. That's how you gotta imagine these patterns. So they can decide what kind of light goes in there, but they can't create light outside of those stripes. So yeah, people basically have patterns which they can light up if they want to, and yeah, use that for all sorts of reasons. Cool. Okay. So yes, you basically have the walking nest, which is an amalgamation of a variety of animals and such, and probably also some plants. Then it found the proto-species of the lore, changed the lore into what they are now. And the lore's function is basically a multi-tool. Well, not so much a multi-tool, because I think that's a specific thing. But like a Swiss Army knife. They are basically a generalist tool to be used by the walking nest. Because they are intelligent, they are flexible, they can manipulate things both with their hands and with their magic. And they are relatively intelligent, so they are good at problem solving. They're also uniquely autonomous. A lot of species that become part of the walking hive cannot act autonomously outside of the walking hive. Or the walking nest. Sorry, I use hive and nest interchangeably because of the concepts, and it's a bit confusing, but yeah. Anyway. So you've got the... Wait a moment, I lost my train of thought. Right. Yeah, so lore are autonomous. They can act outside of the walking nest, and so they also kind of get used as scouts. So they will actually go around on expeditions to basically plot the path of the walking nest, and to figure out where valuable resources are, where dangerous things are, and where perhaps, you know, we shouldn't go because it's not yet cultivated, or it's not yet the stuff isn't quite ripe yet for the taking or such. It should be avoided so as to not cause an ecological problem. So basically they go around as scouts, and as such they are relatively autonomous, and they often go out for like weeks on end, coming back with information. Like, actually, the amount of time that they go out depends on what the walking nest needs of them. They might go out for just a day for short range scouts, or they might go for weeks on like big multi checks to see like what is out here roughly far ahead. Now, while they are outside of this region, they are disconnected from the hive mind. Behold, more of my awful brain doodles. I need to... I swear, what is it? Now let's not look up what a brain looks like. I don't want to horrify you guys too much. Anyway, yeah, so they are actually disconnected from the hive mind while they are out on expedition. But they go in small groups, and they need to basically communicate during that time. So when they are out on expedition, they will actually learn. They'll start developing language, because while they're in the working hive, they don't need language because they basically have a direct mental connection with everyone else. So their thoughts are everyone else's thoughts in a sense. It's one big thought at that point. But when they're out on an expedition, they don't have that connection either to the walking nest or to each other. So they cannot just intuit what needs to be done. They actually develop basic language. And this will develop more and more. And each time that they return back to the walking nest, these ideas of language get shared with the rest of the nest. So the nest will gradually, as a whole, or actually relatively quickly, develop a language of its own. And they will all know this language exactly. Like, they will be able to speak the language the exact same, based upon, well, with some differences based on their vocal cords and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I mean, I think I'm gonna have kind of like the outro situation going on here because it has been a while. Let's actually see how long we've been going. Yeah, just over an hour, which is longer than previous episode. Previous episode. Previous time. So yeah, I'm just gonna wind down at this point, so I'm not gonna draw as much and go into as much detail. Basically, so the idea is basically they've developed language, they're developing language, and eventually they might even use language to define like how far to aid them in figuring out how far they've traveled and what kind of routes they've walked and such. And I actually drew inspiration for this one from what I've heard certain indigenous people of Australia do, which is basically they sing a song, and the length of the song defines how long the path that they walk is. So what I like to imagine is basically that they would gradually develop these songs that are set in a very specific meter, which defines their speed of walking, basically. And also like the sizes of the steps, they would just know because they can share information as soon as they get back to the nest. But yeah, basically they would, as they're exploring, they would develop these songs for the paths that they take to help them navigate it, to help the nest remember these paths more clearly and more exactly. So to make navigation easier, basically. And so yeah, you basically get these songs, and eventually, like in the walking nest will kind of start singing these songs to itself. And yeah, the lore will perhaps sing in unison these travel songs, even if it's of a place that they have traveled long ago and have kind of like it has become irrelevant and such. And I think that is a cool thing. But yeah, I wonder what we'll talk about next time. I think I'm gonna call it here for this live stream of the Myriad Skies. Maybe next time we'll talk about this cultivation thing. Who knows? I certainly don't, because I improvise almost all of this. Although, of course, you know, I do have a solid idea of a lot of this stuff in my head already. But I'm still designing stuff as as you guys listen to me. Like for example, the specifics of how the lungs and the hearts interact with each other. I didn't know that yet, and these things. I didn't know that either yet. I hadn't decided that yet. Neither with the exact things of the organ, the magic organ. I mean, at first I thought it was just going to be a sphere with, that was going to be like the manipulator. But then I realized it probably needs a separate storage organ. Yeah. So you guys are here for the process, as well as for the explanations. So this is kind of what I'm planning to be doing with this channel. So yeah, I think that's going to be it for today. Have a lovely time, and I hope you enjoyed.